Well, very briefly, my view would be that the G20 did a good job in terms of the kind of stabilization of demand we needed in 2008 and 2009. I think it did a good job in helping to head off protectionism, and I think it's accomplished nothing in terms of financial reform yet. Doesn't mean it can't accomplish something, but that's what remains to be done. And you know, I haven't spoken on the issue of derivatives and all that, and I would only add that needs to be part of this agenda too. And I very much agree with the point that we should encourage transparent, standardized, plain vanilla derivatives, and they can be traded on exchanges. And we should tax the heck out of opaque derivatives that as we've learned recently, are tailored often not to meet the needs of particular companies with borrowing demands, but for peculiar financial operations.
That's a nice way of putting it. Yes, sir.
Bertrand Renaud, independent consultant, formerly with the World Bank. When I listen to you, and when we think of the lesson of Canada, the question that comes to my mind is that it seems that the G20 may be a better vehicle for addressing country problems than global bank problems. It seems that the global banks are out of control from any side. It is to the extent that no national regulator can cover the entire set of issues. And if we look at, for instance, the discussions, was it the discussions in Europe about coordinating regulation, and when they reached the conclusion that no single EU regulator could function, it would have to be a coordination of national regulators. Should we extrapolate, or is there any way of not extrapolating, let's say, that particular lesson, and the global banks would never be controllable by anyone, so that eventually this question of taxation of banks and capital is a Walter Mitty issue, as you phrased it. And in that sense, my question to you is that, is there a greater likelihood of the G20 addressing the policy issues of global imbalances or even insolvency of countries and not being able to reach the private banks and the global banks? Is it a false dichotomy that I'm drawing there?
I'm not sure what the role of the G20 in addressing country solvency problems will be. In Europe, they're going to be dealt with by the EU and the fund. In the US, they're going to be dealt with by ourselves or nobody. So I'm not sure quite what the role of the G20 is, other than to provide moral support for doing the right thing here. On the big banks, I despair when I put my point, which I think they're going to be difficult to break up, together with your point that they're going to be difficult to regulate. That's a recipe for a traffic accident, big traffic accident. So I am still hopeful that we will find a way to agree on how to regulate them adequately. Finally, you mentioned Canada, and that's really a very deep issue of a sort that maybe I'll throw back to Mr. Roberts. Canada epitomizes the too big to fail problem. They've got 4 big banks, all of which are way too big to fail, but they're Canadians, so they have a culture, are economists allowed to say that, of prudence, where they don't let things get out of hand, either economically or politically. So, you know, maybe next year will be the year of the Canadian financial crisis and we'll take all this back. But there seem to be, you know, it's not only that, you know, the grabbing hand is alive in the United States, but that there is something deeper about American politics and Canadian politics that we need to fix.
Follow up, please. Yeah, let's with other people can hear you in the back. Thank you.
I completely agreed with you. I was at there was an American enterprise in Institute conference comparing the Canadian mortgage finance system with the U.S. finance system. And what comes out very strong to me as a long-time resident of the U.S. is that I've always been fascinated by politicians running against good government. And Canada has been completely different. And when you see that culture, I think economists have ignored it. I call it the utility function, but it seems inevitable. And the Australians have made the same point. They said we have too few banks to allow them to mess up. And I think the former Prime Minister made exactly that point. And some of the best regulators at the World Bank that we were watching were the Canadian regulators and the Australian regulators as anticipating problems and not letting ideology and politics run the system. Now, what are the lessons for the G20? I don't know. I would make a quick comment. It seems the G20 is helping because the Chinese will never listen to the US government as a matter of principle, but they seem to be listening to the views of Brazil and other large BRICS because it becomes a technical issue and not an issue of national sovereignty. And I don't know whether my comment is an isolated view or a prevailing view.
Ken.
Ken Yates of Jefferson Waterman International and the former Foreign Service. I have a question more political than economic. You got 20 cats, going to try to get them all in a single bag on a date certain in November. Korea has a lot at stake in this, what's seemingly coming disaster. It has a remarkable economy. It's gone a long way to become a world figure economically. What elements do you see, both of you, in terms of what can be lost by Korea if this doesn't come out in a reasonable way? If the 20 individual different economies can't get anything together, does Korea suffer as a consequence?
First, take the cat called Argentina right out of the bag and throw it into the street, I think, because Argentina still is in technical default and shouldn't even be in the G20. Yeah, there are risks, and that's why our point is that this risk is of overpromising, of having too many of these meetings, and not having really any substantive agreements that have been worked out at the more of the working level that could actually advance, the ball some. And that's been the problem as far as we're concerned.
Korea has large securities markets and derivatives markets by the standards of emerging markets, really by the standards of anyone. So in that sense, what is done or not done will affect it. Korea was hit hard in 2008 because of financial transmission, when investors deleveraged and U.S. investors took their ball and went home. The Korean financial markets and economy got hit very hard. So they're fragile, they're vulnerable from that point of view. Mr. Roberts on Argentina makes an important point about the G20, and this speaks to the issue of what can it accomplish. The question, as I would pose it, is who appointed this particular set of 20 countries, actually there are 23, to be the, quote, steering committee, unquote, for the world economy? Answer is nobody. There was no process. There was no written constitution. My own view is that it would be desirable to align the membership of the G20 with the membership of the International Monetary Fund Executive Board, which has a constitution. It's called the Articles of Agreement, and countries sign on to that when they become members. The resulting grouping would have more legitimacy, therefore, and it might carry more weight.
Okay. Do we have any final question for our two panelists? Well, if not, let me thank both of you very much. This has been, for me, very enlightening. It's an important topic. We're going to continue to watch it. We thank you very much for your presentation, and most importantly, thank you in the audience for coming, asking the question, and hopefully you got the answers that you want. We probably have a couple of minutes if you want to try to corral, but only for a couple of minutes. Dr. Eichengreen is off, as I said, to the World Bank in a moment or two. So with that, please join me in thanking our two panelists.